All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this Ftrack webinar, Going Remote, Episodic TV VFX. My name is Ray Cuevas, and I am the art manager at Mountaintop Studios. Today, we're going to be talking about visual effects for episodic television. Over the last few years, visual effects for television have escalated from a few big moment shots per person to some 800 shots per episode. Shows like The Expanse, Raised by Wolves, and Westworld are packed with effects in nearly every scene and with huge production values that we often see in Hollywood-grade effects are now, or were usually reserved for the big screen alone, we're now seeing in TV. All of this is great for audiences and their entertainment, but it means that visual effects pipelines have had to evolve. After all, as production values rise and audiences' quality expectations go through the roof, creative deadlines remain the same, and that's a big challenge. And now there's a new challenge to make things even trickier. The increasingly global nature of VFX production, amplified in 2020 by pandemics, lockdown, and remote work. All told, episodic TV VFX is tougher than it's ever been before. So how can supervisors, producers, and other creatives overcome these challenges? We're going to answer those questions today. In a few moments, I'll let our speakers introduce themselves. They're 5 VFX creatives with experience on everything from Dark and Heroes to Snowpiercer and Gotham. Over the next 90 minutes, they will discuss their creative process, how COVID lockdowns and remote work have impacted their projects, and how workflows, tools, and technology are uniting projects and the people who make them. It's going to be a really great discussion, and we'll dive in. And with that, we'll dive in and say hello to everybody shortly. But before we begin, however, I would like to cover just a few things about the webinar. The runtime is going to be 90 minutes. So we're going to be ending today around 12:30 p.m. Pacific time. The chat function is on and open throughout the webinar. So if you have any questions, please post them in the chat. We're going to have about 10 minutes at the end where we're going to post some of those questions to our speakers. So please don't be shy. And then finally, the webinar will be recorded and shared with all attendees. So we'll send a link once that is available to everybody. So that's it. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. First of all, we have Jeremy Moore, Head of Production at CoSA VFX. Jeremy, hello.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Ray. How are you? Hello, everybody. My name is Jeremy Moore. I'm the Head of Production at CoSA VFX, as Ray just said, based out of our headquarters in Los Angeles, where we've recently completed work for The Prom with Netflix and have begun new episodic work for upcoming seasons of Nancy Drew, Lucifer, Station 19, and Pennyworth.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Next up, we have Krista Allain, who's a VFX producer.
Hi, how are you? Nice to be here.
Doing good. How are you?
Good. My name's Krista, as Ray just said. I'm a visual effects producer on a TV show called The Expanse. I've been on the show for since season 2, and we just finished season 5, and we're just about to get into season 6. So I've been on it for a while now.
That's pretty awesome. Love that show, by the way. Huge fan over here. Next up, we have Darren Bell, who's also a VFX producer.
Hey, thanks, Ray. How you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
Good, good. Yeah, I'm Darren. I'm a VFX producer as well. Toronto-based, like Krista and Bret, who's coming up at some point. I've been working the last few years on Snowpiercer. It's been a fantastic run. We're having a lot of fun. Also have my feet wet in the VR space, a co-founder of a company called Fun Train VR, and looking forward to our chat today.
Awesome. Awesome having you. Next up is actually Bret Culp, who is also a VFX supervisor.
Hi. Yeah, I've been working in the business for nearly 30 years now. And the last 6, I've been an independent supervisor, meaning that I typically am hired by the production, and then we will hire what we call the VFX vendors. And typically we work with many, but not always. And yeah, we look forward to getting into it.
Awesome. And then last but not least, we have Sean Stranks, who's a VFX supervisor.
Hello. Nice to see everyone.
Hey there.
I'm here in sunny and warm Montreal. No joke. My name's Sean Stranks. I'm a visual effects supervisor. I've done a bunch of things from this year from Dark, the final season of Dark for Cinesite, and another series called Halo for Cinesite. And last year I was the on-set visual effects supervisor overall for Raised by Wolves, and some other stuff before that. And it's nice to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Well, it's really great to have you all here today. This is going to be a super fun discussion, I'm sure, especially since we have so many awesome speakers with great experience. So I'm going to start with a really light question, a really easy one. What do you guys think is the biggest challenge that we're facing currently with episodic television or visual effects for episodic television? Anybody want to take that really easy first question?
Sure. I think the biggest
Nobody. Great. So I'm going to start with Darren. Yeah.
Okay, great. I think the biggest challenge is right now is getting it shot. It's getting that, getting those frames into our pipeline. I think a lot of us have worked so many years as, vendor side or client side in remote capacity that right now the biggest challenge is getting the footage for us.
Yeah, I bet that, it must be an incredibly difficult thing just locking down locations and all the logistics around it, having to work through a global pandemic, which, it's kind of unprecedented, right?
It's a tough
how
one.
about, yeah, Sean, what do you think?
It's a tough one too, because when you think you're going to be shooting something at a certain point, because COVID keeps coming back at us, this things keep happening. Okay, we're in a new lockdown now, and everything's pushed. On the studio side, anyway, it must be a nightmare to try and schedule this stuff. You think you got something in the bag, and you're like, oh no, we're shut down again. We can't proceed for another 6 weeks at best. So it's really tough to sort of schedule everybody's time from the top all the way down to the studios.
Sure.
I couldn't agree with you more, Sean. Like that the schedule and budgeting side of it, especially, those were already challenged avenues for all of us in visual effects. Those things have been crunching for years. And now in COVID, just with the fits and starts of all the production stops and starts, it just has so many impacts on the visual effects process in order to, or preventing it from really being coherent and consistent a lot of times, which is really unfortunate lately.
No, absolutely. I'm interested actually to hear how has COVID changed the way that you're approaching some of those challenges that have come up because of the pandemic. And Sean, I'll start with you, or Jeremy, if you want to take that one.
No, I was just going to ask, like, in what specific way do you mean, Ray? Like just in production challenges, or just the budgeting part of it? Or?
Right. Yeah. Just production challenges. Mainly, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things that visual effects has been doing over the last 10 plus years is globalization, right? And so now with COVID, it's sort of a mobilized, globalized workforce, and that everyone has to be remote and all over the world in order to meet the rebates of wherever the shows are shooting. So it's the biggest part, I think, at least in terms of the production, is the collaboration part of it. Like, how do you get people all over the world talking coherently in a way that makes it all work, right? And that's been a challenging set of yards, I think, for a lot of us.
Absolutely. I'm interested to hear from Bret or Krista how they have approached those challenges in the Expanse.
You want to take it, Krista?
Well, I think that beyond COVID, one of the biggest challenges, at least from Bret and my perspective, which we have a slightly different perspective, I think Darren can appreciate it too, because we're more on the production side, is just managing expectations. I think, at least for us, that's one of our biggest jobs, is to manage, because budgets are getting smaller, schedules are getting smaller. So how can we produce the best quality work within those constraints, which are already tight enough? So our job the way we see it mostly is we're managers of everyone's expectations. And then you throw COVID on top of that, and it just, as everyone can appreciate, it adds just another layer of management on top of it. It's like, okay, so our schedule gets smaller because now we have to add like PPE, time for cleaning, like we're talking about like on-set stuff and the physical part of it. And then probably the budgets are smaller too, because you have to stretch it farther to account for your crew being at home, or more equipment to get them online. And so I think for us that has been a challenge, but we were pretty fortunate in that when we had to go into lockdown, we were at a time in our schedule where we were at the end of our shoot. So we were already fully in post. So we were able to pivot pretty successfully in the change from working in an office to working at home. And luckily all the technologies, we were able to really take advantage of them and make them work for how we needed them to. So we're lucky.
I would also add that, again, to tie into what Krista's saying, we were a little different in that because of the nature of the Expanse and the amount of shots required, and I know that we'll get into that in a little bit, and the time frame and all of that, we at different times had employed up to 11 different vendors on the show in any one year, meaning that there was already a certain level of remoteness. A lot of them were in Toronto. We worked with people on the West Coast, in Quebec, and elsewhere as well. And so there was that we were already doing. And then in addition to that, we would have daily, which is my favorite part of the whole process, but daily Cinesync reviews with our showrunner in Beverly Hills, and our production company was in LA, and some of the writers were in New Mexico. And so we were kind of already working that way. So I think it affects probably the production side in that way a little less than it affects the individual vendors who's now their whole teams were all of a sudden remote. So
right.
I'd be interested to hear how it's affected them actually.
I'll speak to that if I could, if you don't mind me
Please.
jumping in.
Sure.
It's been an interesting challenge, Bret, without a doubt. I mean, I think CoSA was about 98% in the studio before the lockdown happened in the United States and Canada and elsewhere. And I think we're probably 98% remote now. And so it's been a huge undertaking for probably, there was about 3 weeks there in March, April timeframe where effectively very little got done as we transitioned that whole thing and got all the systems kind of, I guess, buttressed. Like we had remote systems, TRDG and things that are utilized for a lot of that kind of remote working. But having to adopt it on such a wide scale so quickly was certainly an exercise in patience, I think, in trying to get it all set up and running. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think, obviously this has brought just a lot of unforeseen challenges. Anybody else had that same experience, just having to wait out while vendors adjusted for you to be able to continue production?
Yeah, I mean, we had some who kind of hit the ground running and jumped in quicker and were able to kind of pivot to work at home faster. And some of the larger companies, I think due to mitigating legal risks and the rest, were just a little further behind as they needed to kind of protect themselves and make sure that they were meeting all security protocols.
Yeah, when I came back from Africa at the end of 2019, got to Cinesite. It was my first time working out of a vendor side studio for a number of years, and so it was great because I'm seeing all this stuff and all this pipeline stuff, and everything's working amazing. It's beautiful. And we just started on dark. And so we're just getting into a flow, right? Like everything's starting to crank, and then boom, and you go, what the hell's going on? But credit to not just Cinesite, but a lot of the other studios, because we all have friends who work at all the other studios. We all know people from our careers, and everybody talks about how well their studio is doing, how's it going over here. And it seems like everybody transitioned really fast. And there was a 1 to 2 week period where it was a bit like hit and miss with artists, right? Because the supervisors tended to bounce early, and all the other artists are sort of getting in there, getting up to speed. Computers are being picked up from vendors, chairs are being picked up, people are sorting out their offices. So there's like about a 2 week period where everything was a bit hit and miss. But after that, it really started to sort of find its groove. And for me anyway, I feel like there was a sort of almost this acceleration of work, because everybody was kind of happy to be home. There was this weird sort of vibe, and but it was quite good. But I will sort of I agree that some of the legal circumstances around working from home were quite prohibitive in some ways, because every vendor and every studio has their own set of rules, and you can do this and you can't do that. So there was a bit of hiccups along the way with that. But it seemed like most people transitioned quite quickly.
For sure. So I would like to pull back a little bit, from talking about COVID and all of that, to kind of hit on something that Krista actually mentioned regarding audience expectations, and just talk a little bit more about just the VFX in TV right now, right? You guys are all working in shows that are heavily reliant on some pretty impressive visual effects shots. So how have audiences' expectations just changed, especially over kind of the last 10 years regarding the VFX that they see on TV?
I think the lines between TV and film and TV and whatever web, I mean, that delineation of where the project ends up the lines are eroding, and it's clear that the expectation are increasing for what was, people in the past had, in our industries typically have always wanted to work on film because it's higher end work. But I think with with a lot of the projects that we've been talking about and others, that has, it's no longer there really. And as Krista was saying, I mean, it's the classic pyramid of good, fast, cheap, right? People probably know this, but there's the good, fast, cheap, pick two. But in our industry, they want all three of them. And so the challenge has been to be able to deliver that level of work fast and cheap within the parameters of the show. It's always a challenge. It's always been a challenge, and I expect that it always will be a challenge. But with the erosion of these kind of lines, I think that it's pushing things pretty hard. And for me, I love it because you get to tell different kinds of stories with a sort of a longer format, multiple seasons of 10 episodes or, whatever, as opposed to, one 90-minute film. And so it's a lot of fun in that way, and it's fun to push the boundaries, but the challenge is there. Yeah.
No, totally fair.
Yeah.
Anybody else want
to Game of Thrones for upping that TV bar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Game of Thrones. Just set the standard that now everything's like, well, it looks like we look like Game of Thrones, right? Yeah, it is a challenge. It really is a challenge. I mean, that's, the compression of schedules and budgets, and the expectations keep growing, and the budgets and time keeps decreasing. So it's one of those problems that eventually at some point they'll probably reach some equilibrium where we have a system that works and everyone's able to create kind of a standard level of work, but it is a real challenge.
Maybe. I think it's going to
We'll see.
I think it's going to keep pushing. It has so far. But I think to go back to what Krista was saying, I think that a big part of the success in that is managing expectations. And that's, being very clear with the vendors and what the expectations that you have are, and working with them to meet not only the creative, but the time frame, but also managing the expectations of the production and those that that I'm working for. And, hopefully we're very lucky in that we have, I think, very reasonable people that we work with, and we can say, and we will a lot, well, that's kind of outside of what we're able to do in the next 2 weeks. But what about this? And sometimes that what about this allows for even greater creativity. And it's the whole idea of the constraint forcing the creativity out of it. And I think we end up, there's a lot of really big shots, fully digital shots. About a third of the show that we do are completely digital shots on the Expanse. But there's a lot of things that we do that aren't huge and have a big impact as well. And I think it's just finding that balance and working with everybody to hit and manage the expectations.
Absolutely. And then for Jeremy or Sean, have those expectations and that quality bar, have they affected the size of the teams that are working on these shows in terms of the VFX teams?
Do we take it first? Okay. Yes. Short answer, yes. The expectations are higher, and obviously higher expectations. I think fundamentally there's one thing that needs to sort of be said is that VFX is artistry at some level, right? It's artistry. There's a lot of creative art inside of it. And that's not always a linear process. So that is a hard thing to squeeze into a specific box to say it's going to take this amount of time or it's going to cost this amount of money. Although we all try to do that because of the nature of the market, we sort of have to package it in that way. But those expectations have created a system of having to have more and more artists in the building in order to reach those quality expectations, even within those confines. As the schedule's compressed, you have to find people who can turn around work faster and faster and faster with less iteration and be right the first time in order to try to meet that creative process while allowing it to happen in the time frame. That it just causes lots of spikes in terms of staffing and resourcing for just about any show as you sort of meet any set of notes that come through, and then as you address those notes, things go back to client for review. You usually need a lot less people, and then when notes come back, you have to spike back up in order to address things very quickly, and try to keep a high level of quality in that process as you go.
And along with that current the increase in quality, the expected increase in quality on this stuff, which is fine and dandy. Then we've got the crewing availability, which is doing this, right? Because everybody's trying to hire people basically within their own countries because nobody can really travel. Working remotely can be problematic if you're working in the UK or you're working in living in the UK but working on a show in Canada. That doesn't work anymore, or really doesn't work. If you've got your show's based in Montreal, you've got people working here, they're all working from home, but then somebody says, well, I need to go back to wherever it is I'm going to go. That can be a problem technically for the company. So there's another sort of problem that's kind of layered on top of that, which crewing as a thing can have an effect on those expectations because you just won't be able to get there in time.
Sure.
There's also another part, like finding artists and kind of artist recruitment process is much more difficult in sort of this COVID world, because obviously there's not as many conventions, there's not as many meet and greets where you can go to schools and things. Exactly. and try to meet new people. So that's a really good point. That's a huge challenge.
Definitely. Yeah, so another thing you mentioned too is, like schedule compressing, right? And so I come from, I'm in the video game world, right? So I am working on a project for, 2 to 3 years, at a time, sometimes even longer. So, in this world of VFX for TV, how do the schedules differ between, VFX for TV versus VFX for feature film? What are those main differences in general?
I think they're kind of, they're very different, and you build assets in a different way, you ramp up resources in a different way. But even looking at it from the vendor side, when do you have to start a certain element? When do you need sign off on, those plates or that edit to begin? Because there's, let's say there's 12 to 16 weeks in a TV schedule from plate turnover to final delivery. You really need to also keep track of what's important at that time. And, is there shots that need to start early? And being in the second season of a show, we have most of our assets made. And I'm sure Bret and Krista, have the same kind of thing. A lot of their assets would be with vendors already. So you gain some time having those assets made, but you still need that time, that creative time to get those shots to a great place.
My experience too, because I started out primarily in feature films, and I transitioned over to episodic on Killjoys, just before I moved over to Expanse. Anyway, so I've started out in features, and my experience is that the danger with features is that they have the luxury of time that episodic doesn't, and they have kind of the opposite problem in that a lot of times there's schedule creep in that it'll just drag on and on and on and on, and the VFX vendor is not making any money off of it because like the schedule has gone months and months and months over schedule, and you're just like, make it end, like someone approve this thing and make it end. Whereas in episodic, it's absolutely the opposite in that there's never enough time, and the schedules keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter because they need to hit a release date. Yeah, that's my experience. They're pretty much opposing beasts, really.
Gotcha. I'm interested to hear from the vendor side, whether that, for you guys specifically in Cinesite, and do you guys then seek out one type of project over the other, in terms of feature versus TV?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if we necessarily seek out specific projects, but it is something to mind as you go into it, as you sort of look at the composition of the work that you have in the building, so that you make sure whatever projects you're taking on are taken on responsibly and kind of fit within the composition of the work that you have. I agree fully with Krista. I think feature stuff, I've so much creep on some of those. We've just finished up a few feature projects that were slated as 3 months, and I think went almost 9 in terms of the actual schedule for the full duration. And we have some episodic projects that go from turnover to delivery in about 12 days on our side for episodic, recurring television. So it's a really wild gamut between those two, and you just have to be very considerate when you look at it to make sure that what you're taking on is reasonable.
I won't speak to what Cinesite's sort of aim at finding projects. I've seen, well, we've all seen shows that go on way longer than they're supposed to. I think now is potentially amplifying that as well, because deadlines are getting pushed. So therefore movies are just going, well, we got time, let's work on that asset a little bit more, or let's recut this entire sequence or whatever. So yeah, I mean, again, you're coming back to, if it was normal, maybe you'd aim at those projects and be like, you know what, we're not going to go down that road because we've worked with them before, and it's going to go way over, it's going to go way long, and whatever else. But now it seems like we're in this sort of strange world. The one thing I love to say is when, with regards to episodic stuff, even on something like we did last year on Raise But Wolves, it's a 2-team job, because you're shooting and you're far away from where it's being sort of posted. So you're shooting, and then there's another team who are putting it all together at the same time. So you've got one team running ahead, and then the other team sort of taking it in as it comes through the process to be able to show that stuff. So technically you're showing stuff while you're still shooting, albeit episodes behind, but still with it at the same time. That's because all that time is very compressed. So they want to get the show out, but you're still shooting the end of the series. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
So.
Yeah, that's what we did on our show too, because our schedule was so tight that we had two teams that kind of leapfrogged each other. So Bret and I were the team for even blocks, quote unquote even blocks. So that would be, so we shoot in blocks. So the first 2 episodes, and then the next 2 episodes, and so on and so on throughout the whole season. So we had 2 separate teams of producers and supervisor for each block, just because the schedule was such that it would have been impossible for Bret and I to do it all, because Bret would have had to be on set shooting while he was prepping the next couple episodes. And then we followed the same structure into post as well, just because of the delivery schedule. And for us, it worked really well. But it was really an invention of necessity, because it was just such a tight schedule. So.
Yeah. We were odd block, Krista, not even. Odd.
Oh,
we're odd. We're odd. Yeah, the thing is that we had these, as Krista was saying, we had these 2 teams that worked really well together, but ultimately Krista and I kind of managed the whole thing, so that there was one consistent, cohesive view. But I personally like to be on set whenever I can. That's changing with COVID, actually, because the requirements of the show will be, or is now, and I don't know if this is the case everywhere, but they want to really limit. Well, I know that they want to limit the amount of people on set in general, but the production is looking to have, one person on set extensively throughout. So we're going to change the model a little bit, but up till now, without COVID, it's worked really well, as Chris has said.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting, to hear how you're approaching, that kind of workflow that has been brought on because of the current situation. So have you found that type of remote work, right? Chris, you were mentioning that you had, the post is being done somewhere else, right? As you're shooting, you're passing things on. Does that make things easier? Does it make it more demanding? Is it somewhere in between?
Well, there's pros and cons to everything. And I mean, as Bret was saying before, we were already kind of working remotely already. So we just had to tweak a few things, and we found a few other pieces of software to help us when we all actually made the transition to working from home. Like, for instance, we use a software called Discord, which I think is actually originally created for gamers to chat while they're gaming. But our coordinator was like, hey, this piece of software probably we could use to our own benefit. And so we all log in, and we all have our own little rooms that we hang out in all day, but you can pop in and out and chat with each other as if you're in the office. So stuff like that made the transition a lot smoother for us. But it's hard not being in the office. I think, like, the serendipity of being around other people, you lose that. And there's certain things, like just the meshing of bouncing ideas off each other, standing around the water cooler, kind of trying to hash out like challenges and stuff like that. I miss that. And I find that maybe you don't come to solutions quite as quickly. But if you have a good team that's committed to staying in communication with each other regularly, they're not insurmountable challenges. So, which we found that we managed okay, I think.
I have a feeling that a lot of what you just said, again, probably applies more to the vendor side of things as well, because a bunch of artists together really feed off of each other, where we're mostly reviewing and giving out direction. But just, Krista and I have spent most of our careers on the vendor side as well, so we understand that world quite well. And I think it makes us a little bit more reasonable maybe when we approach the vendors for things as well, and we can look out for things that we think that they should be looking out for and maybe aren't yet as well, just because it's ingrained into us. But really, I think that, I used to love it when a group of people would get together, group of artists would get together and brainstorm on something, or just by osmosis, and just that collaborative, creative of center, which I think is something that's a lot more challenging during these times.
Yeah,
artists can't lean over. Oh, sorry, Sean, go ahead.
Exactly.
Go ahead.
Exactly.
Yeah, please.
I totally agree. There's those like you said, water cooler times, and and even good for just the artists learning as well, because they hang out, they pick up stuff from each other, and I tried this, didn't work. Oh, I saw your shot in dailies. Did you try this? Or blah 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 blah. That's tougher to do, in these situations. That information doesn't bleed out as much as it used to. So it's a bit unfortunate for that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's so like the artists sitting next to each other and just being able to tap the person next to, even just for just basic stuff, pipeline stuff, just that's such a meaningful interaction, just to build that team and community in order to solve some of those creative problems. So that is a challenge to put together, as Bret clearly pointed out.
Yeah, my studio is actually using Discord as well currently as a way to try and mitigate some of that. But no, absolutely a huge challenge to just being able to tap somebody in the shoulder and like, hey, how will you approach this, right? And like kind of that agility is really what gets impacted. You have to now reach out to somebody and schedule some time to talk to them if they're not always available. So, so actually, I think that's a great.
Sorry.
Wait,
well, I was just gonna again mention again Discord. It has been a huge thing for us, to the point where the visual effects team started using it, and now the whole production is using it. And I think what's so great about it is to use it in that way, is Krista was saying, you can set up like essentially virtual offices, and you can be connected. We have boardrooms, we have editorial. Krista and I had an office. The Even Block team had an office. And what's I think great about it is that they're always there, but you can set it up so that it's not like you have an open mic all the time, right? It's kind of the cool thing about Discord is you can set it up that way if you wanted to, but really it's kind of the best way it works is a couple of key presses and then you're live. It's like your live intercom. Anyway, it really has been a game changer for us.
Can I just say though, anecdotally, like I kind of love having a window into everyone's homes though. I just love being able to see everyone in their own environment, and it kind of gives you another perspective on the people that you work with, and you can kind of, like, you see their pets and their kids sometimes, and it just adds another layer of humanity to these people that you work with every day. I like it.
And also some days we use Discord. We go through the whole day with only communicating through animated GIFs. So
yes.
Yeah.
There's a GIF
for sure. I hosted
we need to say.
Yeah, the previous webinar I hosted with a few other producers, that same deal. They really enjoyed being able to just see into other people's homes and just give that extra layer of humanity, right? Sometimes when we're deep in the middle of production and crunching and everything, it's hard to, you're kind of like a machine, right? You're working, and that just adds an extra layer of like, no, this person, some people have kids, they have to step away to care for their kids now and things like that. So that is a beautiful, I think, silver lining to the whole situation for sure.
every morning before I go to work. I gotta straighten up. Hold on.
Yeah. No, definitely. So I think that's actually, kind of talking about technology as well, since we're talking about Discord. It's a good segue to talk about, I'm interested to hear how each of you are approaching media review these days. How, what kind of tools are you using, and how are you approaching the process, during these times? And Jeremy, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. So we are coincidentally Ftrack users on our side. Sorry for the plug. So we utilize Ftrack a lot. We have some other video sharing and annotation tools that we utilize a lot. And really, we at CoSA have a very regimented daily structure for scheduled reviews. So our coordination team will basically take all the shots that are in production that need review with the supervisors. They'll kind of analyze all that, create lists with an Ftrack, and then we'll populate our review tools, and then everyone will be able to look at all the media together, review, annotate. Those annotations will then be distributed to the team in individual meetings, as well as then uploaded into Ftrack to try to give us a few checks and balances of the review process to make sure that we can get whatever notes get decided at any point into the artist's hands. We're also big proponents of having artists in those dailies. So oftentimes we'll have the supervisor team working through the review, and we'll bring an artist to go through and go, you see this little bit here, fix that bit, or fix the lighting here, or whatever it might end up being. And then they can, off they go back to just work on their shots. And then oftentimes before the end of that review, they might even have an update that we can look at. So being able to review media in sync and be able to annotate in sync has been a big lifesaver for us.
Definitely. Darren, you want to go next?
Yeah, on the vendor side, we found Frankie after many years of using Cinesync. Frankie has become kind of our go-to tool. And in many ways, it's really helped our review workflow with producers, studio, and network, just because there's you're not downloading files, having people and because of work from home, some people are working from iPads, some people are working in remote places where they don't have the ability to download gigs and gigs of files for review. Now they're sent a link, and with a basic internet connection, you're reviewing immediately. And so that's been a huge boom for us and just ease of review. Now, obviously, there's limitations on fidelity and resolution, and you're looking at higher quality files, and then obviously UHD and final review. But as an initial review tool, Frankie's been a great help for us.
Awesome. Bret or Krista?
Well, we have for many years, since our time on the Expanse, used Cinesync as our main review tool. What we did this season, season 5, which I'm kicking myself for not doing previously, is choosing Cinesync Pro. And what Cinesync Pro allowed us to do, which was so much easier, was using our project management software would auto download to everybody who was on the session, instead of having to send out that data or a link to that data, and then they would have to download it. It was all sort of automated. And for our showrunners and producers and people who are on those sessions with us, it takes away a huge hassle that was there before. But Cinesync is an amazing tool for us. I'll use our project management software when the work comes in to make notes, to organize it all, see where we are in general. But that is of limited resolution. And so it's not really the data that's within that software, the video clip in that software. And so one of the things that we always have all of our vendors do is to output still compressed, but very high resolution, DNX HD or ProRes or something, files that we determine at the beginning of the season that I can then just drag into another piece of software that can display that resolution. And a lot of the time it's Cinesite, because it's so easy then to go in and make annotations, which are then saved out and sent off into the notes in that production management software. What I love the color sync tools in Pro. You can do all the things that supervisors do, crank up the gamma, you know, push the contrast, do all that stuff to test the fidelity of the image. You know, and it's easy to navigate. So if we had, you know, 20 shots come in, I can just drag them all into Cinesync, just walk through it, make notes on it, output those notes as annotations, include those. So that's kind of our main process. We have typically a Cinesync session with our showrunner every day, which I think is his favorite part of the day, and it's certainly our favorite part of the day. I've been on shows where that's definitely not the case. But what's so fun about it for us is that we're essentially with him, Narain Shankar is our showrunner on The Expanse. We make up a third of the show. It's like, here's the story. You guys just come up with the shots. And, you know, we don't, for that stuff on this show, we don't typically request storyboards from, you know, the director who is directing that block. It's kind of, that's outside their world to some degree, and they just kind of let us run with all that space stuff. And it's so creative and so rewarding, and it's kind of all done through Cinesync. So that is a huge part of our daily workflow.
That's pretty amazing.
You know,
yeah, Sean.
Basically backing up everything you said there. It's the same kind of thing. I think, right, when you're on set, you're doing things a certain way, and a lot of the times you're taking things off of DIT or whatever to talk to your guys back at the thing before any of that stuff gets through their actual pipeline. You know, say it goes to Los Angeles or something like that, and actually in an edit you go, I'm worried about this. I grabbed this QuickTime from DIT, and you know, then you can annotate it that way and all that stuff. Back at the studio, you know, there's often a number of things that we do, whether it's, you know, you're using Ftrack or whatever else, and you're using RV or whatever else. Eventually, it all comes down to a Cinesync session with somebody. And I agree, it's very easy to sort of populate all that stuff. One of the things I've found that I think we should do more of is you know, making sure that everybody has the proper links to the proper stuff. So like you're saying, I'm going to try what you're talking about there, because it sounds much easier than some of the things we've been doing. So it's, yeah, I think the one thing I would love to see more of between a lot of the softwares is, you know, a little revision on how we annotate stuff, because I find I draw a lot, maybe, you know, maybe too much sometimes. And I'd love to see just sort of, you know, lots more tools come into those drawing palettes if we could, because sometimes you really like to get in there and go, it's got to be like this, because I do a lot of concept stuff myself, and I like to get in there and, you know, stuff to do with an arrow sometimes.
I totally agree. Yeah, more of that would be great.
Just a 2020 refresh globally on all software's drawing tools, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that I failed to mention as well, and maybe an obvious thing, is then after we give notes in that management software, typically if they're notes of any size or importance, I'll say, let's set up a Cinesync with them. And so we will then set up a Cinesync with the vendor that those notes go to. Just there's a looking at images and circling things as in real time and pointing stuff. It's just, it saves on iterations, which again is very important in production, in television production in particular, but in general, if you can save a couple iterations, boy, I mean, that's big. The other kind of anecdote I was going to give about Cinesync is that it wasn't as much this season, but in the past, where we would be waiting for our showrunner to join our Cinesync sessions, it would give us time to doodle. And so we actually would find a fun frame within the shot or shots of everything we were going to review and start doodling on them, to the point where our showrunners loves to see these things too, and he took some of those and auctioned them off at an event for a charity contest or a charity event. They're pretty fun. Krista, I don't even know. Krista made a book out of them. We called them First Frames.
We called them First Frames, and they were so popular that I put them together in a book as like our crew gift for our post people.
Wow.
So like,
and by the way, it's terrible art, but really fun.
Oh yeah, it's terrible art. But it's just our doodles.
Wow. That's really amazing.
Yeah. Everybody loved it.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so Krista sent those books around to a lot of everybody who was involved in those.
Just our internal, like all the VFX crew, our post crew, the editors, that kind of stuff. So it's fun.
That's amazing.
That's very, very cool.
No, super cool.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So,
There's one more thing I can say to answer because that's important that I forgot. And that is that we do have daily or more, sometimes more as required, but at least daily on the books reviews with our VFX editor where he cuts everything in and we look at all real time in context, which is critical. And so normally we would, in the sort of pre-COVID days, we would go down the hall and sit with him, and I would make notes and whatever, and a coordinator would be there, and it would all again go into that project management software. So we've found, virtual ways to do that. The tools that we're using, we probably need to find something better, because it wasn't the fidelity of the image. It just wasn't the same in that case because it was a streaming thing. But I think we have some options moving forward. But that also is a critical part of the workflow. Absolutely.
And so actually something that Sean said leads me to my next question, which is, you mentioned about having more drawing tools, these softwares would help you. And I think it would definitely help Krista and Bret's team as well, producing more doodles. But what are some of the tools that you guys wish you had? As we kind of just go into, I think personally, I think that the VFX and just generally entertainment landscape moving forward after this year will probably be changed quite a bit, right? So, as we head into a world where possibly in the future we're going to have a lot just more remote workflows, what are some of the tools you wish you had that could, make your life a little easier with remote work?
I know what I'd like. I'd like real-time 4K review with my editorial team. I'm sure it's possible, but I don't think we have the technology, at least in our group, set up to be able to accomplish that yet. But I mean, other than other tools, though, I mean, right now, I go through a list of stuff we've used, and I don't know what other tool I'm missing. You know what I mean? The palette is quite large. And there's so many different ways to review and kind of see things, ways to manage projects, that it's the tool bag's so large, and it really depends on what you like to use and how you use those tools and how you set up your team as to exactly what software you use. So, Bret, that's kind of like, if you're coming up with a great way to review 4K remotely, give me a call.
I'll be the first to let you know.
Okay.
Our show is in HDR, so that's another sort of level on all of this. We have monitors now that do it, of course, but it's another thing. We obviously that becomes really tricky because typically the way our show works is that whatever look LUTs that we have up to that point to be able to view stuff in HDR, it gets thrown out the window when we get into the DI and it's kind of built fresh. So that is a tricky thing. But boy, I wish everybody, it'll happen, but I wish everybody could see the show in HDR, because this is what I was saying earlier about, the lines being blurred between film and television and whatever, web streaming, whatever. but each of those mediums still has their strengths. And one of the amazing things I think that we are across the board taking advantage of is true HDR in television. And when you see some of your favorite shows that have been shot and then finished in HDR, it is a game changer too. And our show really benefits from it because of the drastic dynamic range of like the inky blacks of space to the blown out, what looks like a blown out drive plume on a ship. And when you see all of that and all captured and all rich and beautiful, we want everybody to see the show that way. But it is tricky to review that way as well. The very last shots that we delivered last Tuesday for season 5 was all about the issues with HDR, and even the monitors that they were using, we found out could only show 100 nits, the full brightness, as they master it in HDR to 20% of the monitor, otherwise the monitor flattens out. And there's all kinds of technical things still to work out with that stuff. And we were wondering, why is it looking flat when it gets bright, and stuff. So there's room to improve there for sure.
I would say that for COVID times, that's been my biggest disappointment, is that for me, my favorite part of the process is getting into the color suites and getting into the mix stage. And so really, I kind of feel gypped this season because Bret got the fancy monitor in his home so he could see it in all its glory, but I got stuck with an SD feed of the final color session. So, for me, that's kind of really been the only disappointing thing for this whole COVID thing. If we could get, maybe I need to invest in an HDR monitor.
I think I had the opposite, Krista. I feel we are using Streambox and the HDR feed for color correct on the 2020 iPad is phenomenal. And I'm loving coloring at home.
I'm jealous.
It's fantastic.
I'm jealous.
It's actually a great new tool for us.
Yeah. Well, Bret, your monitor was a Streambox. It was like a special HDR monitor that Company 3 delivered to his house.
Yeah. Gotcha. And I mean, it was, probably the best feed that the best way anybody will ever see the show. But it was pretty sweet seeing it that way.
Yeah. HDR monitors for everybody then.
So I was actually going to ask about, what are the current limitations, right, that we have, that need to be rectified before we can go, fully remote, right? And have an alternative to just the standard brick and mortar, VFX shop. And so monitors seems like number one. Everybody needs HDR monitors. I would say that you also probably need to get just a fast internet connection to every artist, to be able to upload large files and all that stuff. But I'm interested to hear just, anything else comes to mind in terms of limitations that we need to overcome before we can just have fully remote shops.
I think we just need a faster global internet. I know at the beginning of the pandemic, everything slowed down. Transfer speeds across many networks slowed down. So it's one of those things that is a challenge. To the review point, I mean, the 4K and beyond review is a big one. That's a big one for remote artists. That's one of when I was mentioning the 98% of artists that are at CoSA that are remote, we still have to sometimes send people in because if their internet connection at home is not capable of supporting a 4K download in real time, sometimes they need to go into the office in order to actually review things remotely. So there are some working systems that you have to sort of configure, and a lot of that is kind of down to the end user and their internet connection at home.
Yeah, I had the same, basically myself had that problem with it when this first started. I was like, well, I'll just work from home. Okay, all right, we're gonna go home, set up my little office, and then I realized, oh, hang on, my router is 3 rooms away. So I'm like, okay, that's not gonna work, and I had to move everything around just to get something that didn't cut out halfway through my through the session. You know, you get this big red screen all of a sudden. You're like, oh, you just want to pick everything up and move it, but you can't. So you know, and I think a lot of people had to deal with the same issues. When they first went home, they went, okay, I'll just put it there. And I was like, oh no, I can't. I got to do this, or this doesn't work because it's too loud, or this is I can't. You know, I'm a compositor. It's way too bright in here. I can't work. So I think everybody had a similar issue, and I think they're all kind of figuring out their methods and everything else. But that was, you know, in the beginning, that was at least one of the big problems that we had.
Sure.
And to the earlier point about security, that's sorry, Bret. Sorry. To the earlier point about security, that was a big challenge, as you pointed out, Sean, at the beginning, of trying to ensure that everyone's monitors and setups were all compliant to whatever security standards that we had in place. So that was part of that transition process that made it so challenging to work through.
Yeah, absolutely. Has anybody else had had to think about those considerations in terms of security, which is, I think, huge, for their artists at home?
Well, yeah, even just recently there was a little thing where, you know, things that you do every day from home, because you can share screens and you can do this and blah 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 blah. You know, recently an artist had to go into the office and work because something happened at home. Suddenly he wasn't able to do this anymore. He wasn't able to share a screen because, well, security protocols don't allow you to do that from this place. So then you're going, yeah, but I'm here. I'm here. And so but that's just what that is that's just another layer of, figuring out what you need to do to make this all work. It's just another layer of evolution in it, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that necessity is the mother of all invention, and although it's been a real challenge, ultimately at the end of the day we're going to be better off for it, because we'll figure out how to do these things better in the future. And there's some things that we will revert back to the way we did them before, but there's some things that we're like, wow, this is so much better. Why didn't we do this already? And they're here to stay. So yeah, it's a new world.
I completely agree. We had to completely rebuild a lot of our operational pipelines at CoSA at the beginning, just to try to reinstate how communication flows, to ensure that everyone was operating from the same set of information. And that was a huge undertaking that kind of harkens to that. Yeah, I agree.
I'll be curious to see, just from the vendors, not just Cinesite, but how everybody sort of ends up doing it, is that, you know, what if, you know, vaccines aside and everything else, this keeps happening, that the remote workflow is basically the norm. So more people will be working from home than not. Do these studios need all this big studio spaces, right? There are studios and they have huge buildings and we all know who they are. And do they need all that space? You know what I mean? What happens within the next year or two when those spaces are just, you know, most of the time they're empty, people are working from home and it's successful, right? Who knows? I can't comment.
Definitely.
I mean, there is a lot of money to be saved, though, in preventing all the real estate in terms of the vendor side, especially if everything's starting to transition into a more cloud-based operation. There are visual effects companies that operate 100% in the cloud, that don't actually have a physical infrastructure anywhere. So it's interesting. It will be an odd time, and we'll see how it all pans out. I do think on some level, you know, we've spent all this time and money now as an industry making sure that we can all sustain from home. So I can't see that being abandoned in any, you know, immediate way. Like even if eventually there is a vaccine and everything starts to transition back into, we're all back in the office because of the collaboration aspect of it that we gain, I imagine there's always going to be a benefit to having a remote presence, simply because it allows you to be more agile.
Yeah. I'm sure there will be a sort of a happy period or a happy space in there, which is like, you know, there's a certain amount of people working from home. There's a certain amount of people working from the office. maybe the rest of the office is more, they start to consider these things event spaces in terms of, dailies where, we get crew into the office maybe once every 2 weeks or once a week, and then we do a big show review like that, so everybody can connect. But then most of the time, everybody is kind of back at home. There's ideas like that being sort of talked about, but it'll be interesting.
And I think that actually poses an interesting question. We've all touched upon, the fact that while working from home, we're missing, those, water cooler moments, right? Like being able to chat with other people in the office, being able to lean over and talk to somebody or ask a question. So I'm interested to hear how you guys are currently handling, making sure that your team still feels unified and that they are, they're collaborating. Are there any strategies that you're currently using to foster that collaboration and kind of team spirit within within your teams?
I mean, I think from the vendor side, we have. I would love to hear from the the facility guys. On the vendor side, we have a fairly tight team. There's 5, 6 of us who are kind of make up the core team on Snowpiercer, and we have 6 to 8 compositors in house that we've worked with the supervisor and I for some 10 to 20 years. So our team all knows each other quite well, and we don't need a lot of reinforcement and bringing the team together. We're on the phone so much during the day. I would love to hear how the facilities are, handling that.
I'll jump in on that if I could. It is a real challenge. Team building is a challenge, and you have to get everyone into a room. There's a lot of conversation that has to be had at any stage, like getting everyone into a room, making sure they're talking, even remotely. We do that a lot with artists and just trying to. Because CoSA is I think 120, 130 people right now, and so obviously we flex up and down depending on the nature of the shows that come in, like a lot of vendors in terms of our scale, and it comes down to a lot of documentation and a lot of bulletproof sort of operational practice, so that when someone new comes in, you can hand them some starting documentation to go, this is how we operate as a company, this is the workflow, this is the communication flow, and that is something that's understood and sort of practiced by everyone through that process. And then occasionally having to remind everyone that, visual effects is one of the biggest team sport industries possible. Like, it requires so many people to get things done on the vendor side. So it's really important to always assume positive intent of your teams, even if something seems to go wrong, because typically there's just some breakdown in communication or pipeline somewhere. It's a lot of hand holding, honestly. It's just trying to keep and make sure that everyone's talking frequently.
For me, when I do the show dailies or whatever portion we're looking at, whether we're doing match move or we're doing lighting or we're doing this and that, I like everybody to kind of be there, on the Zoom calls, even if really you're the portion of the shot that you're doing is not like a big deal. It's good to just have those guys or artists involved, because they hear what's going on. It's like just bring in your whole team. They're all working on the show, so bring your whole team in, and you can just listen in, so everybody knows what's going on. Then it makes them feel as well included. It's really important. Everybody's got a different situation at home. Some people's situations are better than others. So, some people are making light of it, and some people it's very stressful being at home. But they don't really have a choice. So you really need to sort of make people feel included and have a good time at it. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, you're making movies. You're having, it's a great thing that you're doing. We're not out digging holes in the street or whatever. You're having a good time. You're making up stuff. It's basically, it brings out the kid in you when you're doing it, and you should make everybody kind of feel like that. And that sort of brings my teams anyway, brings them together. You know what I mean? We always have a good time on a show. I remember on when we were finishing up Dark, everybody was new to the working from home, but we were finishing, this is the first show we finished where everybody's not at the office, and our late nights were turned out to be not that late in the end. We had a great sort of finish to the show. And everybody just kind of stayed on, we used Google as the, Google Hangouts or Google Meet or whatever it's called. And everybody's just kind of there. They come on when they got something to look at, but on those late delivery nights, and we've all been there, it was always just that it was fun. You know what I mean? And it's just keep building that kind of atmosphere when you're in, especially in delivery mode. It's really important. Keep people included.
I would say that it puts more emphasis on what I always try to is part of the sort of the something that's really important to me always, and I think in life as well as in work, is just good, clear, concise communication. I think that's really important. I think that is something that I've found being on the other side of productions in the past that is often missing. And for all of those reasons of, setting expectations and making people feel, we'll start a Cinesite session with a vendor often. I'll ask who's on the other end of the call. And sometimes if, we're talking about animation and the animation lead or the animator, him or herself isn't there, I'll request that they're there. A lot of the time that's already happening because people realize the importance of it, but I really want those people there too, even from my side of things. And then again, making it clear what the expectations are from me, wanting to hear what their expectations are of me and us as well. I think that's important. It's always been my philosophy to surround yourself with good people and let them do what they do. I think that actually makes people feel good and included. And on the shows that I do, one of the most important things that I say at the beginning is that the best idea always wins. And it doesn't matter where that idea comes from. It could be anybody on the team at any point. There's no ego involved in it. It's just, nope, that's the best idea. And I think when and we've all been on shows where that's not the case, I'm sure. And then when somebody, who is, an animator or a compositor or something down the line has a thought, and that's encouraged on those sessions. And I really like that idea. And I say, oh, that's amazing. Let's run with that. My favorite thing in this job is when somebody gives me something that is better than what I imagined. That's like my most favorite thing. And so why would I not want to be open to that? And I think that in that kind of environment, people feel, really feel part of it as well, as they should.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
So as we, I don't know if anybody had anything else to add to that, or
I did want to just add one thing. I think it was, it was a good point that Bret made, but letting people do their, what we've hired them to do, hiring good people, empowering them and letting them do their jobs. And I think one thing that I've really noticed in the last few months is if you've hired the right person, right people for the jobs, you're not looking over someone's shoulder. You're not trying to make sure you're not listening to every conversation. There's so much happening in the background that, I don't need to be a part of all the time and be in every conversation, that all this stuff's kind of happening, fluidly. And it all just kind of comes together. And we had one situation where something wasn't working. We looked at the process, we rejigged it, and it's been great ever since. But I think, it's that kind of the first time you're doing something, we were delivering, the way we're delivering plates to color just wasn't working. And we changed that. But I think it's entrusting those you've hired to do their job.
Absolutely. All right, so we're about to head over into the Q&A session, but before we do, we've discussed a lot about how after this pandemic is over and hopefully we get that vaccine, we're we're potentially seeing a future where, you know, we don't want to waste all the work that's been done to go remote. So we'll see a future that will be probably different to where we were before the pandemic. So I'm interested to hear, just personally, really quickly, do you prefer working from home, or do you prefer being at the studio like it was before 2020? I'll start with Jeremy. You first.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's a loaded question, right? Like, there's so many pros and cons on either side of the argument, so it's really tough to say. I love not having to commute through LA, but I mean that's a localized thing.
Huge plus.
Yeah, huge plus. Oh man, I do think it will forever be changed. I do think that yeah, I do think it'll forever be changed. I personally like working remote on a lot of levels because I think I actually get more done on the day, just because there's a lot more moments where I can put my head down, and we have a similar sort of chat system where I can just have headphones in and listen to see if anyone pops in to ask me any questions or check kind of we have a Slack-like internal system that we use to get messages if there's anything urgent that would be the digital equivalent of someone just popping into my office to ask me a question. But I find it happens less frequently digitally than it did in person, which is a good thing and a bad thing, I guess. You know, so there's an element of productivity you gain. I've done a lot of chats with my artist teams, and it's a really divided topic. A lot of them love working remote for that same reason. They don't have someone coming over and peering over their shoulder all the time, or feel that pressure. They feel like they could just sit and work for 5 hours on something to try to get it done right the first time, without any sort of influence or interruption. But a lot of people miss the social aspect of it. And I think no matter how hard we try, talking through Zoom with your hands doesn't work as well as talking in person with your hands to demonstrate how something should be when you're sitting there going, no, like this. No, we want to put that over here and make it move like this. Or it's just, I think there's an element to that will forever be lost in a digital world. So it's good and bad.
Fair enough.
I agree. This pros and cons to both. I mean, I like working from home, but I also miss the same kind of thing, going in and talking to people, walking around to people's desks and blah 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 blah. I always get in trouble because I'm always touching the screen, you know, in the daily sessions. Like, you know, so I walk up to the screen and I go, just you know, just this area here, a little less of whatever. I can't do that. It doesn't work as well on Zoom. So that part I miss, but I agree. Like, you know, sometimes I find like I get more done simply because you can control your immediate situation.
Right. Yeah, fair enough.
I
Brent or
personally can't wait. Sorry, me, I'll go.
Yes, please tell us.
When we first transitioned to working from home, I loved it. Like Sean said earlier, it was like the first few weeks, everyone was like so gung-ho about working from home. Like, yes, I don't have to commute. I don't have to set my alarm. But that got old real fast. And yeah, I mean, I am pretty productive at home. I'm able to focus pretty well, but I really, really miss the social interaction, like everyone else is saying, and it's just not the same through a computer screen. So yeah, I miss you, Bret.
Aw.
Fair enough.
Well, I'll take that as my cue. But I can work pretty well independently. So, and Krista's always sending me the gifts that express what she's feeling. So, I think for me, half of my job is in the production, the shooting, and the prep, and all of that. And I think I haven't gone through all that yet. As Krista said, we're lucky enough to finish shooting sort of mid-February, and it was only a couple weeks after that everything closed down. And so had we not finished when we did, we frankly probably would have been on hiatus for months, like so many people. So I suspect that is going to be a lot more challenging for me and our team than the post end of things. But I also recognize that it's very different than the vendor side. But I do miss sitting across from you too, Krista.
All right.
Yeah.
Then
and finally for me, I'm you know, I think it's a mix. But I do like working from home. I've had the luxury of working most of the summer from the cottage, which has been like fabulous. Working, getting up in the morning, going for a paddle, going for a swim, and then getting into my Cinesinks in my day. I've been working West Coast time, so I've got a full morning of, you know, activity time and me time that I would never get going into the office. I think that's been a huge plus just on my mental health.
For sure.
I'll tell you this really quickly. You said something there that just, because when this all started, I was actively looking for a flat to buy, right? And it was like, well, I was going to buy something like kind of downtown Montreal, like just a little to the left. And then this all hit, and we found something. We actually put an offer, and we effectively bought it, and it got delayed because of COVID, blah, blah, blah. And then I started thinking about it all the time. It's like, I can do this from anywhere. I started looking at places further out and further out and further out. I haven't bought anything yet, but damn it, I really want to buy a place in the mountains, you know. Just like, you know, something with lots of trees, nobody for miles, and a good internet connection. Absolutely would work, you know.
Absolutely. No, that sounds awesome. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Oh, sorry. I was silly, but I had the exact same thought about Palm Springs. It's just like, I'll move out to the desert and just live in the desert somewhere and be done with it.
Yeah, no, for sure. As long as you get that internet connection, it's really an important part, right? So we have, I think, about like 3 or 4 minutes to get through some questions, some Q&A from the audience before we have to end it for today. So let's try to do these rapid fire style. So if I can get some quick answers from you guys. First question we have is from Allain, who says, with current COVID protocols, how difficult has it been to get FaceTime with the principals on set when you have a topic of discussion? Can somebody one of you jump on that?
I mean, at least from the vendor side, we had 10 days left when COVID shut us down. And you know, we started prepping again. We shot our 10 days in September, early October, and the protocol just changed to Zoom. You know, if you want to have a department meeting or a production meeting, it's a Zoom meeting. And I mean, like always on our, you know, you pick up the phone or you text someone if you want an immediate answer. I mean, the stakeholders are usually available to answer questions for us.
I found something challenging in relation to it, that showrunners and decision makers oftentimes have even more complicated schedules due to COVID protocols and all the planning associated with it. So I have personally found that it's been harder to get some FaceTime with them over the course of the last 6 to, you know, how many months? Gosh, lost track of time now, 8 months, whatever it's been. So it's interesting. I think it depends on the show, but I have seen definitely some experience of slowdown of response up until the point that production is finished. And at that stage, then sort of a waterfall of response.
Gotcha. So a little bit of both. So we're getting it. So depends heavily, I guess, on situation.
My feeling on when, you know, on set, just thinking back to last year, was it'll be really curious to see if I'm able to get as much data on set as I normally would be able to, because, you know, my team, at least in on Raised by Wolves, it was constant. You know, we're grabbing stuff. You know, they're always getting the cameras, you know, photographs, whatever it may be, just tons and tons of data, because, you know, we'd be sending it back to our second team, and we want to make sure that they have everything. I'll be curious to see how it works out this year with, you know, just, are we going to be able to get as much data as we normally do, you know? And plus, on top of that, the interactions that you have with other people, you're constantly interacting with cast. because you got to tell them, oh, well, this thing's over here, or yeah, that ball that you're holding is going to be floating around, or you're doing something like that, and look over there, that giant thing. That interaction is going to be limited as well. You can't just rock up anymore.
Sure.
You got to go through departments and say, I got to walk up over there. Is that okay?
Fair enough. I have another question here. I think this might have to be the last one. But if I could get a quick answer here on how much of this pandemic, this question is from Parth, how much of this pandemic situation is affecting the new junior artists in the industry?
It's an interesting question. I'm trying to, I imagine, my gut instinct, kind of harkening back to the point that we were saying earlier about recruitment, and we can't get to schools a lot in order to meet and greet people, that recruitment is a much more challenging exercise, especially for people trying to break into the industry. I'm not sure that's something that's been specifically cracked yet. We've been having to staff in various locations for CoSA and using a lot of talent recruiters and things to help us isolate the right kind of talent we need in the right location to meet whatever rebate requirement might be applied on a certain show. But that only goes so far. So that is something I think that is still to be resolved and figure out how it is going to work, at least on the school side of things.
Yeah, for sure. I think junior artists, one thing they rely on is that they tend to spam out there looking for work at the beginning of the career, and they tend to just sort of pick up and go. I got a job in London, or I got a job in LA, or I got a job in Singapore, or wherever it happens to be. That's sort of cut off now, and for at least for the foreseeable future. So you're much more reliant on your local industry, right? Even within Canada, it's tough to pick up and go to another city at the moment, right? So you kind of really rely on who's hiring locally, right? So I agree. I think it'll be a tricky one for them.
Definitely.
Yeah, and the
right.
the lack of sorry, Ray, sorry. The lack of having people next to each other. Like, how do you help teach them? How do you help guide the guys that are just starting? So that is going to be a real challenge for all vendor teams, I think, in terms of recruitment for junior artists. And I guess advice for them will just try to get your reel out there as much as possible and make sure you've got a really prominent web presence so that you can be found when people are looking.
Yep.
I think that's the group
Definitely.
of people who benefit the most also from looking over their shoulders to others in that osmosis that we were talking about, the natural conversations. So, I think it's a challenge for sure.
Definitely. All right, guys, I do think this discussion is really awesome and I would love to continue it, but we are out of time. So with that, I want to say a huge thanks to all of you for joining us today and sharing your thoughts. There's a ton of takeaways here for everybody. So thank you so much. I also like to thank everybody for attending. I hope you got out of that as much as I did. It was a super informational discussion that we had today. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about remote workflows, you can sign up for the next Ftrack webinar, an introduction to Ftrack Connect, on November 18th at 11 a.m. CEST or Central Eastern Standard Time. In this webinar, Ftrack's in-house development and integrations expert will reveal all about Ftrack Connect, an application that helps users use Ftrack's creative plugins or to run Python scripts created using the Ftrack API. You can also learn about Ftrack's desktop media review solutions, Cinesync, in an introduction to Cinesync on December 2nd at 9 a.m. In this webinar, Rory McGregor, Cinesync's product manager, and one of the people that actually helped create the platform, will discuss what Cinesync can do, how it's used, and the plans for the product in the future. If you'd like to learn about more upcoming webinars at Ftrack, then you can head over to ftrack.com/webinars, where you can see what's on next and download previous webinars. Our discussion today will be on there soon, and you can expect a download link for that. So we'll send that out once it's ready. If you have any questions, sales related or otherwise, please get in touch with Ftrack's Head of Sales Americas, Brian. He'll be here, or he'll be able to help you with any questions you may have about the software and how it works. And we'll also be sending you a post-webinar questionnaire by email at some point soon. Please do check your inboxes and let us know what you think if you find the time. As well, we'll use that information to improve our webinars in the future and make them more beneficial to those that attended. Again, I just want to say thank you to all of our speakers today. It was awesome having you all. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Hope you have a great rest of your day. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.